Hello mate, and welcome to another exciting episode of Render Review. This week we've had a bumper crop of render submissions, so I've had to pick the 4 that I feel are going to be the most beneficial. And so the first submission here we have is from Troxvi, and as you can see we have 3 young ladies who appear to be about to go on some kind of military expedition in a picnic site. So we'll see how that goes. They've got plenty of stocked up rations there, some at the back, some here in the front. There are 2 things that leap out at me in this image that I would personally fix. Before we do that, let's just analyze the rest of the image. So what we've got here, this young lady at the front is loading ammunition into a magazine, loading rounds into the magazine. Nice rifle laying on its side down there by her. And it appears that there is reasonable contact with the seat down there. It certainly doesn't look too bad. So overall, this particular model and her posing and composition all seem to be pretty good. The next is this redhead girl at the back, leaning on the back of the seating area. Her feet seem to be hovering a little bit above the floor. The contact doesn't seem quite right there, but the bit about her that stands out to me the most is that her face and head feel quite artificial. I don't know if it's the lighting or if it's just the choice of skin textures and hair, but when you compare it to this model here, her hair and face and head look very natural, very realistic. And then when you compare it to this model in particular, there seems to be a stark contrast between the two. And the one in the middle, this young lady, seems to be sort of sitting halfway between the two in terms of realism and quality. So this is an interesting thing that comes up every now and again, is that when people use multiple models or multiple characters in a shot, if they haven't bought the characters from the same vendor, or perhaps they've run out of options, you can see that there's a stark contrast in realism and quality between the different models, and it can make an image very difficult. The idea is suspension of disbelief is very difficult to pull off when the models don't all look like the same hand has built them, let's put it that way. So again, this isn't me picking holes in Troxvi's render specifically, it's just that the choice of models, or the choice of characters in this case, I feel like maybe is something that needs to be looked at, just purely because of the difference in the quality of the product. It's all kind of mashed together in one image, and it makes it look strange to the eye. Okay. So we've got a nice red light source coming off camera here, lighting that area over there. You can't see what it is, so you just kind of assume that it's some kind of, it's a light of some description down there. And then we have this young lady here who appears to be currently trying to jab a pink toothbrush into the magazine for her pistol. Now, knowing what is happening here, I know full well that she's using the toothbrush to clean the magazine. However, the way that she's holding the toothbrush and the way that she's holding the magazine, you could be forgiven for thinking that she's just trying to use the back of the toothbrush to jam something in there or other. It is what it is. Elbow contact with the table is very good, and the rest of the props that are laid out on the table are also very well positioned. You can see there's almost no gap between most of the props and the surface of the table, which is good. And then care has been made to make sure that her legs aren't digging into the seat, and this is something that a lot of people make mistakes with, which Troxvi hasn't done, is that they'll concentrate on the upper body when they're trying to position a model on a seat, and they won't actually notice that the heels are digging into the bottom of the seat, or they're poking through the floor or whatever. So in this case, that's good, and because we can't see whether her bum is actually on the seat or not, we just have to assume that that is the case. When it comes to this model, The only thing that, apart from the weird grip of the toothbrush, the only thing that grasps me is this area around here. It looks like, and this is only what it looks like someone's been at her with a liquefied brush in Photoshop and kind of messed up a little bit, because there's that huge indent in the side of her jaw, which there isn't on this side of the jaw. And it's possibly stems from the awkward angle that her head is at, where she's trying to, I don't know, pay attention to something that's probably being said on the radio by this young lady. But yeah, that's something that I would be mindful of in there. Realistically, the only two things that that sort of jar this image for me is, firstly, the fact that there is no depth of field inside the cabin at all. So from there to the edge of the cabin, everything is completely in focus, and then all of a sudden, outside the window, the background is blurry. So there's that kind of wrecks the image a little bit in that respect. Now, I know that it's because they've used an HDRI or an image for the background that they didn't want to have in focus, because then it would show that it's a photograph rather than a rendered image like the rest of the image is. But what I would recommend in this situation is to include depth of field, even if it's only a little bit, so that the bokeh and the outside image isn't quite so abrupt. It goes, you know, literally you can see the very tip of the door, which is arguably the furthest thing away from the camera, is still completely in focus and fully detailed, and then suddenly, boom, everything outside is blurred. The other thing is the lighting feels a little bit impossible, if that makes any sense. We're inside a small RV, recreational vehicle. There's an awful lot of light in there pouring through the window, which is great, but there's also a light source behind the camera of some description, which is filling the cabin as well. So what I suppose I would be looking for here is to increase the contrast and have the shadows be a little bit darker, to indicate that this is a very small space that they're in, and not a vast space with loads of lights everywhere, essentially. This is a really good image, just to be clear. I'm just picking up on the things that leap out of my eye as things that I would change. Either way, good image, Troxvi, well done. So something to be proud of there. Next up is an image from a repeat offender called MissFortune. And what we have here is a young lady sitting on a sort of set of steps or a porch out of the back of a rustic house, having a vape or a cigarette. It's hard to tell if this is an e-cigarette or a real one. Doesn't really matter. Looking at the sky, and there is I'm feeling there's kind of a morbid feeling to the sky. Is just the color palette that's been chosen for the background area. This area of their image is very almost post-apocalyptic, it feels. Now, I might be completely off base here, because with these images I don't have any context, but the color palette that's been chosen indicates that there's something going on that's not great over this way, when you compare it to the colors of the model's hair and the cigarette and that sort of thing. I'm almost getting a bit of a Walking Dead feeling to this image, just purely because of the style of art in the background. There's feels like it's a cinder block house or something with an old wooden porch there. Looks good. The skin texture looks really nice, really well sort of defined there, with the way that the light is striking the face at the right angle, and the eyes have got a nice bright catch light there as well, so you can see a nice reflection. The grip on the cigarette is a little bit awkward, but that is not something unique to MissFortune. I would say that the majority of Daz studio renders, which includes someone smoking, they're always holding a cigarette weird. As someone who's smoked for a number of years, the way that actors hold cigarettes often makes me chuckle. You can tell they don't smoke because of the way they hold the cigarette, and this is the Hollywood way of holding a cigarette rather than the actual way that a smoker would hold it. So I'm nitpicking there just because I think it's funny that an inaccuracy that you see often in Hollywood has been now replicated in MissFortune's render here, which I find amusing. The facial expression itself is really good. It actually looks like she's exhaling smoke. It looks like she's blowing out through her lips, and then there's this kind of a smoky smoke billowing from her lips just around there, which is really good. Overall, pretty good. I would be really happy with this render if it were mine. Again, the depth of field on the character is very, very, very slight. A tiny little bit there, as you can make out on that shoulder. Everything else is sharp in focus. Interesting kind of choice. When it comes to depth of field in this kind of shot, it really is a crapshoot. You know, you can try so many different types, and one of them will work and one of them won't. It is what it is. When it comes to photorealism, the only thing that leaps out of me in this instance is that the clothing texture that feels, I don't know the right word, but it feels wrong. I think it's the way that it's stretching around here and the way that it's capturing the light. I feel like maybe this wasn't an Iray material, but it was rendered in Iray. The way it's catching the light just feels slightly wrong, and the way that it's stretching feels slightly wrong. I know that that's not necessarily something that's MissFortune's fault, but you don't give me these things so I can just pat you on the back and tell you they're great. You want to see if there's anything that I can spot that might be done better. It might be worth experimenting with the fabric material of this shirt just to see if you can find something that looks a little bit more realistic. But overall, really solid image. I'd be proud of that if I were you, MissFortune. Well done. Next up, we've got Jade Ivanov, who has submitted this image. There's not a great deal to talk about on this one, purely because there's a lot of stuff going on, but there's very little context. It's just a model holding a fan with a umbrella. I can't tell if she's holding the umbrella. I don't think she is, based on the position of her right hand. The handle from the umbrella would be coming in that direction, but I don't think it's actually the case. I think it's just a prop that's been put in the background. The model looks a bit like Chloe Grace Moretz, which can't be a bad thing. And the way that the model is lit and the choice of hair model is really solid, really good. Clean render there, I'm happy with that. And the way that the dress drapes over her shoulder and arm also looks very effective. So nice use of what I assume is a D-Force prop there. Although the way that this sash hangs off the shoulder, I'm not sure what's going on there. If that's part of the D-Force, the D-Force or not, it's interesting. She's making eye contact with someone just behind the camera off to one side, and her neck doesn't look forced or jarred, but she doesn't have, from what I can tell, that isn't a completely default expression. There is a subtle expression of some sort on her face. I do like the lighting, I will say that the shadow, particularly under her jawline, is very well defined, and the shadows are nice and dark, but not so dark that you can't see the detail in them. You could arguably go a little bit more in the contrast, so this shadow in that area, or a little bit darker, but I wouldn't say necessarily that makes it a bad choice. Other than that, there's not a great deal else to talk about with respect to this image, purely because there's a lot of what I assume is post-processing to add these particles in front of the character has been done, which kind of disguises the rest of what is, well, around this area, around this area, around this area, there is nothing. So what we have is a character with a, I'm going to go with a 1 light setup, maybe a 2 light setup, and then this prop in the background, which could very well have been added in post as well. In terms of what you could improve on the character, you could look at the way that she's gripping this fan is very loose. So you could look at maybe making sure that the fingers are closed around it a little bit more tightly. And really, that's about it, to be honest. As to say, whatever the rest of the image has been done in post-production by the looks of it. Doesn't make it a bad image, but as I said, as far as rendering goes, there's not much else for me to comment on. So either way, good job, Jade. Last up is Ithius Eiros, and he's got this Star Wars character sitting, looking like she's trying to repair a speeder with a lot of lights going on. There are a lot of lights in this shot, and we'll get to that momentarily. So we've got a nice bit of smoke coming up here, making it look like she's just been doing some welding or something in this vicinity. Either that or the metal is just hot from coming into the workshop. The metal materials look really good, really solid. Nice use of depth of field as well to make sure that the eye is focused on the character and on the speeder. And she appears to be looking at something behind this bit of motory looking stuff here. So something in that direction. There's obviously some important detail in there that she's looking at. Outfit is really good. I like the shiny leather effect. That's quite cool, and you can see the texture is really solid. And again, the depth of field hiding this toolbox in the front and the light in the back. So really nice, solid, just really overall good composition on this image as well. You can tell that a great deal of time has been spent making sure that the camera is in exactly the right position and focusing on the things that it needs to be focused on. If I were to change anything in this image, it would be to reduce the amount of light. Now, it's unusual for me to say that because normally I'm telling people to put more light in. The reason for it is that when I look at this image, the first thing that my eye is drawn to is this. And that's because there's a great deal of light being reflected off of it from a light source out here somewhere. And it's the brightest thing in the image and it's in focus. She's the second brightest thing in the image and she's also in focus. So my eye eventually wanders over this way. But for the first couple of seconds, this is what I'm looking at. And I shouldn't be. I should be focusing on that instead. The highlights around her tentacles, I suppose they're called, is good. You can see from that bit there that the light appears to be blown out, but that's because she's got white skin. When you actually look at this area, there is a little bit of blowout there, so you could stand to turn down the brightness of that rim light a little bit, just so that you're not losing detail into the highlights. But it's not that bad. It could be an awful lot worse. In fact, the video I recently did looking at light theory might help you out on that one. But overall, it's a really solid image. Certainly something that I would be proud of if it were my own render. So I would say a really good job, Ithius. Just, as I say, be conscious of what you're doing when you're putting lights in a scene. You could, if you wanted to, use canvases to isolate the character. Throw in the highlights on the character, and then when you render the rest of the image, turn those lights off so that it doesn't create this distracting brightness on the objects that you aren't meant to be looking at. But either way, really good job, so thanks very much for the submission on that one. Alright guys, thanks very much for watching that episode. I hope you found it useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'm sure you will. I'll see you in the next one, but until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye-bye.